Be honest with yourself. You don't procrastinate because you lack time. You procrastinate because you are afraid. Afraid of failure. Afraid to begin. Afraid to see that you are not as good as you thought. And while you search for an excuse to wait for the perfect moment, time keeps moving, cold, indifferent, and never returning. Procrastination does not pound on your door. It slips in like a thief, stealing hour after hour, day after day, until you realize you've lost an entire year just standing still. The Romans had a saying, "He who wastes time is shortening his own life." But there is good news. Procrastination is not a life sentence. It is a habit, and habits can be changed. In the next few minutes, I will share with you 5 principles from Stoic philosophy that will not only help you break free from procrastination, but it will also train your mind to be as solid as steel, so you can do what needs to be done, even when you don't feel like it. Principle 1. Recognize the true nature of procrastination. Procrastination is not like a storm that suddenly strikes, loud and easy to notice. It is like fog, quiet, light, almost harmless. But that is exactly what makes it dangerous. You don't notice when it begins, until one day you look back and see opportunities drift away like faint, hazy figures, never to return. I once heard a friend lament. He wanted to write a book 3 years ago, but to this day, he hasn't written a single chapter. When I asked why, he said he didn't have time, didn't have enough knowledge, and hadn't found inspiration. But those were just pretty names for one simple truth. He was procrastinating. And procrastination, at its core, is not because of lack of time or knowledge, but because of fear. Fear that if he started, the result would not meet his expectations. Fear that once the curtain lifted, he would face the harsh truth that he was not as good as he thought. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What would you do if you were neither afraid nor distracted? Do that now." At first glance, it seems simple, but pause. Let that question echo in your mind. If you were not afraid, what would you do right now if you were not pulled away by noise? Notifications, social media, meaningless conversations, what would you put your hands to? That question gives you nowhere to hide. It pulls you out of the hazy zone of excuses and forces you to look directly at your own choice. The problem is, procrastination often wears the mask of very reasonable explanations. I just need to rest a little. I have to do more research. It's not the right time yet. These lines are like an elegant coat, hiding an uncomfortable truth. You don't want to face the discomfort of starting. That feeling when you open a blank page, when you type the first sentences, when you exercise after months of neglect. It's awkward, slow, and sometimes makes you doubt yourself. The Stoics understood that this discomfort is not the enemy. It is a signal. You are stepping into a zone where growth is needed. Procrastination does not vanish by waiting for the right mood. It only disappears when you begin, even when your mood is far from ready. One way to recognize procrastination is to pause and ask yourself, if this were my last day, would I do this right now? That question is like a sword, cutting through all the false reasons you tell yourself. Because on that last day, you would no longer care about perfection or what others think. You would only care about whether you live true to what matters. When you realize procrastination is just an illusion, a paper wall built by your mind, it loses its power. You will see each time you step through that wall. The work is never as frightening as you imagined. And then you will understand why the Stoics always begin with truth. Because only when you see the enemy's true nature can you defeat it. But recognition is only half the journey. Knowing where the enemy is will not win you the battle. You must also know how to strike, even when your mind resists you. And that is what the next principle will reveal. Principle 2. Start with the smallest possible action immediately. There is a harsh truth. Most of our grand plans die right in the idea stage, not because they are too difficult, but because they have never started. They just sit there, like seeds in a drawer, with the potential to grow into a forest, but never touching the soil. My friend, the would-be author, admitted he had been procrastinating, then asked me what he should do to break free. I didn't talk about a 90-day plan, nor reading 5 more books, or buying new software. I simply said, "Open your laptop, write the first sentence, right now." He laughed, thinking I was joking, but I was completely serious. Epictetus once reminded us, "It is not the grand act that matters, but the first action that sets it in motion." If you reflect on this long enough, it will change how you view productivity. The Stoics understood that the human mind is often obsessed with the big picture, and that very picture overwhelms us. When you think about writing a book, the image of 300 blank pages instantly prompts your brain to retreat. But if you only think about typing a single sentence, the weight disappears. Remember, we don't climb a mountain by leaping to the summit. We climb by taking one step at a time, and the first step is always the hardest. Not because it is physically demanding, but because it breaks the state of stillness, just like when pushing a boulder. You need the most force to make it roll the first time. After that, momentum makes the rest easier. That day, I forced my friend to write just one sentence. No more, not perfect, no editing. Just let the cursor blink on the screen and type the first few words. He did it. And once he finished that sentence, he said, "I think I'll write another one." An hour later, he had a page. A week later, his first chapter. The strange thing is, most of your great days will not begin with a flood of inspiration, but with a small action you reluctantly take. It could be putting on your running shoes, opening a document, or making the phone call you've been avoiding all week. Once the action starts, inspiration follows, not the other way around. The Stoics did not wait for the right mood to begin. They began, and let their emotions be shaped by the act itself. This is a mental reversal most of us miss. Waiting to be ready before starting. It's like waiting for water to boil before lighting the fire. You'll wait forever. There's a question I often ask myself when I feel I'm about to slip into procrastination. What is the smallest action I can take right now? If I have to write, maybe it's just typing the title. If I have to exercise, maybe it's just walking out the door. If I have to clean the house, maybe it's folding one shirt. Each small action is a brick laid down. Do not underestimate them, because even the sturdiest wall is built from small bricks. Starting immediately does not mean rushing or being hasty. It is a commitment that you will not let today pass without laying that first brick. You don't have to know exactly where you are going. You only need to know, if you don't step forward, you will stay in the same place forever. My friend learned that lesson. 3 months later, the book was complete, not because he had a grand master plan, but because every day he wrote at least one sentence, just one sentence. But it was the key that unlocked the flow of everything that followed. Start with the smallest possible action immediately. That is how you defeat procrastination through action, not willpower. And once you get the stone rolling, you'll be amazed at how far it will go. Principle 3. Separate emotion from action. There is a common mistake many people make when fighting procrastination. They think they must feel ready before they act. In their minds, emotions are the green light that allows them to start. If they feel excited, they jump into the task. If they feel bored or tired, they postpone and tell themselves, just a little later. The problem is, a little later often stretches into forever. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You don't have to wait to be in a good mood to do the right thing." It sounds like a simple reminder, but if you truly grasp it, it will change the way you work forever. The Stoics knew that emotions are unstable. They change with the weather, your health, your sleep, or even a single negative comment from someone online. If you let emotions dictate your actions, your life will be like a rudderless ship, drifting with the wind, never reaching its destination. I remember my first attempt at running in the early morning. The alarm rang at 5 a.m., and immediately a wave of excuses hit me. It's cold today. Just 30 more minutes of sleep. I can run tomorrow instead. My emotions were completely against my original intention. But I reminded myself, this doesn't require a feeling. It just requires doing. So I got up, got dressed, and stepped outside. After 5 minutes of running, the laziness was gone. I felt light, awake, clear. I realized if I waited for the feeling of wanting to run before I ran, I would never leave the house. Separating emotion from action means looking at what needs to be done as an objective task, without labeling it as like or dislike. It is like a soldier following an order without argument. You don't need to negotiate with yourself each morning over whether you should do the task. The decision has already been made in advance. When I was young, I worked with an old carpenter. He never complained about work, whether it was raining or sunny, whether his back ached or he felt tired. One day I asked him, "How is it that you work so steadily every day? Don't you ever feel like you don't want to?" He smiled and said, "I work because the work needs to be done, not because I want to or don't want to. When I want to, I work faster. When I don't want to, I work slower. But I still work." That answer was pure Stoicism. They don't wait for emotions to give the green light before acting. They act because the task needs to be done, regardless of how they feel inside. The problem with modern people is that we have grown too accustomed to seeking inspiration before working. We watch motivational videos, play energetic music, read inspiring quotes, but all of those are like a morning cup of coffee, effective for a short burst, but fading quickly. Once the effect wears off, we slip back into our old state. The Stoics teach that lasting motivation doesn't come from emotion. It comes from principle. If you live by the principle, if this needs to be done, I will do it. You no longer have to fight an inner battle every day. You don't have to ask, "Do I want to do this?" You simply ask, "What's next?" Separating emotion from action is not about becoming cold or emotionless. It is about freedom. Freedom from being ruled by fleeting emotions. So you can act with consistency. And here is the key point. When you act consistently, regardless of emotion, your emotions will gradually learn to follow your actions. Just as the body gets used to a training schedule, your mind will get used to working at certain times. One day, you will realize you no longer need to try as hard as before, because the action has become a habit, no longer dependent on inspiration. The friend I mentioned earlier also fell into this trap. There were days he told me, "I am in a terrible mood today, and I don't think I can write." I simply replied, "Write 50 words. They don't have to be good. They don't have to be edited. Just type out 50 words. He reluctantly did it, and most of the time, once he wrote those 50 words, he continued to 200, then 500. After a month, he admitted, "Turns out emotion isn't a requirement for writing. Writing is what creates the emotion. We cannot control when emotions come to us, but we always have the power to control what our hands do." That is the strength of this principle. Remember Marcus Aurelius's words, "You don't have to wait to be in a good mood to do the right thing." If you can live by this sentence, you will step through a doorway that most others are still fumbling to find the key for. Principle 4. Set a commitment threshold. There is an interesting truth about the human mind. We are often not afraid of doing something difficult, but rather of fully committing to it. The thought, "I have to do it all," or "I must make it perfect," immediately triggers the brain to build a defensive wall, and procrastination begins to creep in. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is the right thing, do it immediately. If not, ignore it." The commitment threshold is the boundary. That helps us step past hesitation without being crushed by the fear of the whole package. Imagine you are standing in front of a cold lake early in the morning. The thought, "I have to swim 20 laps," might make you hesitate, But if you set your goal as simply, jump in and swim one lap, starting becomes much easier. The same applies to work and to life. Rather than demanding of yourself, I must finish everything, commit to a minimal threshold, small enough to bypass resistance, but big enough to create momentum. The commitment threshold works like a bridge. It does not ask you to run the whole road at once. It only asks you to take the first step. When working on a project, tell yourself, I will just work for 10 minutes. Often, after those 10 minutes, you will find yourself ready to keep going. This is a psychological effect that has been studied. Once we break through the starting barrier, the momentum of action carries us further than expected. There is an old story about a Roman merchant. He was famous for completing enormous tasks in short time frames, even though others considered them impossible. When asked his secret, he simply smiled and said, I only start with the smallest thing I know I cannot refuse to do. The rest finds its way to me. He never mentioned motivation or inspiration. He spoke of a commitment threshold, low enough that procrastination had no excuse to exist. In practice, setting a commitment threshold is a way of tricking the mind. We tell the brain, it's fine, we will just do a little. And in doing so, we defeat the silent enemy of expectation overload. The Stoic does not see this as self-deception, but as a strategy for self-mastery. Because their goal is not to keep promises to their current mood, which is ever-changing, but to keep promises to reason and duty. Think about it. If every morning you only committed to writing 50 words for your book, after 1 year, you would have nearly 20,000 words, a complete manuscript. If you only committed to 5 minutes of exercise, after a few weeks, your body would have built the habit, and those 5 minutes would naturally extend without feeling forced. The commitment threshold is not your limit. It is a doorway. This doorway opens onto the path toward big results, but you only need enough courage to turn the handle. Epictetus once said, "It is not the great tasks that break us, but the ones we do not begin." And beginning, in this philosophy, is not a grand gesture, but a humble, decisive movement. When you know how to set the right commitment threshold, procrastination loses its most powerful weapon, the fear of scale. You are no longer haunted by the distant end goal, but instead, I focused on the nearest step. And each step, repeated, becomes a path. We often wait until we feel ready to begin. But the truth is, readiness rarely comes before action. The commitment threshold helps you act first. And let the feeling follow. And once you cross that threshold, you will find yourself already in the flow, no longer wanting to go back to shore. If Principle 1 teaches us to recognize the nature of procrastination, and Principle 2 reminds us to start with the smallest possible action, then Principle 4 is about carving a clear line between thinking and doing. It is the bridge that carries us away from the shores of delay and sets our feet on the solid ground of action. In the next part, we will dive into a principle that makes every commitment last longer. Principle 5. Live by duty, not just inspiration. There is a paradox in life. Most of what truly matters for lasting success, training, learning, building a career, nurturing relationships, cannot rely on fleeting bursts of inspiration. Inspiration is like the wind. It comes and goes without warning. Duty, when placed in the right position, is like a steady, smoldering flame. A flame that never goes out, keeping the ship moving forward, even when the sea is calm and windless. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every morning, "You will meet people who are ill-tempered, ungrateful, arrogant, but that is their nature, and it is your duty to act properly." He did not wait for inspiration to do what was right. He acted because it was his responsibility, to himself and to the community. The difference between those who live by duty and those who live by inspiration lies in their ability to keep acting on windless days. When inspiration fades, those who rely on it stop, waiting for a new wave of emotion to carry them. Those who live by duty do not stop. They keep moving because they know duty does not depend on feelings. Think of a farmer. He cannot wait for the inspiration to sow seeds before starting his season. The soil will not wait. The seasons will not wait. His duty is to plant when the earth and sky are ready, regardless of how he feels that day. This steadfastness is what separates those who achieve sustainable success from those who burn brightly for a moment and then fade away. To apply this principle against procrastination, change how you speak to yourself. Instead of saying, "I will do it when I feel inspired," ask yourself, "Is this my duty?" If the answer is yes, then how you feel becomes irrelevant. Epictetus once said, "No one can compel you to live against reason unless you allow it yourself." Reason is the lighthouse, guiding duty, not emotion. Living by duty does not mean becoming a cold machine. It means setting goals and standards of action based on core values and then following them consistently, regardless of shifting moods. A writer who writes daily out of duty to their craft will produce far more than one who only writes when in the mood. An athlete who trains out of discipline will progress more steadily than one who trains only when motivated. The story of Marcus Aurelius in his later years is proof. Surrounded by illness and war, he still wrote his meditations every morning, not because he was always inspired, but because reflection and keeping a clear mind, it was his duty to himself and to his empire. Had he waited for fair weather days to write, we might never have had that priceless spiritual legacy. Living by duty frees you from the cycle of procrastination, caused by waiting for perfect conditions. Duty does not demand perfection. It only demands that you start and continue. A father does not wait until he feels ready enough to teach his child. He does it every day because it is his duty. In work, duty is a promise to yourself. When you see something as your duty, you place it at the highest priority, refusing to let fleeting emotions interfere. This makes your actions consistent, and consistency defeats procrastination. A Stoic would say, "Emotions are guests. Duty is the master. Guests may come and go, but the master must keep the fire burning in the hearth, whether the weather outside is sunny or stormy." Duty is what moves us forward, even when the mind looks for an escape route. When you live by duty, each action becomes a brick, laid upon the foundation of reason. You are no longer dependent on the volatile shifts of inspiration. And so, you can complete great works that those who live only by inspiration may never even reach. Procrastination is not only the enemy of time, it is the enemy of your own growth and your inner freedom. When you allow it to take control, you do not merely lose precious moments, you suffocate your true potential. The Stoics taught, strength does not come from waiting for inspiration or perfect conditions. It comes from persevering in action, even in the most difficult moments. Remember, every small step you take today is a step closer to the best version of yourself. A version unbound by fear, unbound by laziness, unbound by hesitation. Life waits for no one, and neither does change. Right here, right now, you can choose to stop procrastinating. Let the philosophy of Stoicism be your guiding light, helping you move steadily through the crossroads of your mind, so that each passing day is not a day lost, but a day conquered. This is not only how you overcome procrastination, it is how you live a meaningful life, the life you deserve to experience.